Welcome to another installment of the Texas General Land Office Clean Coast Texas Lunch and Learn series, where we connect with coastal water resources and learn about ways to understand and enhance the sustainable management of stormwater. My name is Jason Pinchback, the Water Resources Manager at the Texas General Land Office, working under the leadership of Commissioner Don Buckingham. This event is sponsored by the Coastal Management Program and is intended to be an easy-to-access forum where we invite subject matter experts to unpack their initiatives into bite-sized morsels, to share ideas that might be useful for neighboring communities on how to improve their local water resources. Clean Coast Texas is here to serve communities by providing local governments, decision makers, and the public with information, resources, and tools to better manage stormwater quality. The tools and guides provided through Clean Coast Texas can help coastal communities implement measures to reduce the impact of land use change on coastal waterways and protect natural resources that support a thriving Gulf Coast economy. Some examples of our services include community planning and ordinance development, which we're here to focus on today, water quality analysis and green infrastructure workshops, as well as planning workshops, grant development and project management, stormwater retrofits, and green stormwater demonstration projects, as well as other water quality measures and communication tools that are intended direct for the general public. To assist the GLO with this initiative, and knowing this type of challenge takes a well-seasoned and knowledgeable team of practitioners, the GLO formed a collaborative which is led by the Hart Research Institute at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Our collaborators include Texas Sea Grant, Texas A&M, Texas Community Watershed Partners at AgriLife Extension Service, and Meadow Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University. We also have a contractor engineering support with Hafen Associates. I would like to thank Jenna Walker of Meadow Center for Water and the Environment and Ashley Bennis of HRI for co-hosting and providing technical support for today. Today's feature presentation focuses on 3 speakers, so we're changing things up previous editions, but I'm very excited about this discussion of community-level stormwater ordinances and related policy practices to ensure resilient and sustainable growth into the future. There's that saying that I've modified a little bit, but an ounce of policy prevention is worth a pound of water quality cure. Good policy put in place can prevent issues, bring long-term economic cost efficiencies, assist with public health impacts related to water use, and enhance the management of environmental impacts associated with land use change. We have 3 speakers today, all working for Doucet, a Kleinfelder company. The first speaker is Nick Dornak. Nick has 20 years of experience in watershed protection and water conservation. Formerly with the Meadow Center, he now leads water strategies in his advancing green infrastructure and One Water initiatives. Justin Murray is a civil engineer with 26 years of experience, specializing in flood management, drainage, and green infrastructure. He's led complex modeling, permitting, and design projects across urban and suburban areas. Also, Lindsey Oskoui leads Red River Planning Team with 20+ years in public and private planning. She formerly served as BCAVE's planning director and assistant city manager, and now oversees regional development and resiliency projects. So let's buckle up, put on our thinking caps, and get ready to learn. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our team to here present and share some information with us.
Thanks, Jason. While we're letting Lindsey get that pulled up, appreciate it. As Jason mentioned, we have 3 speakers today, and it definitely takes a village to make these things work. Putting together the right team is always critical. We're excited for you guys to be here today. And Lindsey, I think you had it, and then we lost it. Working on it. But we're excited to present with you guys today, and look forward to hopefully a really robust conversation at the end. If any of you are considering going through an ordinance process, there we go. That looks right, Lindsey. Thank you. We want to share some of our experience and lessons learned in that process. If you can go to the next slide, Lindsey, and the next one. I just wanted to start with a quick introduction to Clean Coast Texas. If you've been, go one more. Sorry about that. No, there we go. Got it. All right, we'll get going. That's all right. We did this yesterday. We're good. Go back to the clean coast. There we go. There we go. Stay. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. So, if you guys have been following these lunch and learns, I'm sure you're very familiar with the program. I've been a part of developing and establishing Clean Coast Texas from the beginning with my time, starting with my time at the Meadows Center, and then with Doucet, which is now a Kleinfelder company. I've been excited to watch this program grow, to see the successes, the way that the program has adapted, all in an effort to support coastal communities. And I think, as Jason mentioned, this is a voluntary program. It is incentive based. So we need to provide those types of, or the program is set up to provide those types of services to engage with communities. And the key and all the entire time is partnerships. And the success of those partnerships is what we want to highlight one of those today, and just continue to I guess expand on the opportunities that folks have by engaging with Clean Coast Texas. Our work with the City of Port Lavaca to provide resources, education, and develop a stormwater ordinance will be the topic of my conversation at the end. But before that, today, my colleague Justin Murray was going to be giving us a little history lesson on and providing background and context for stormwater regulation on the Texas coast. It's actually a pretty fun history lesson. I heard it the other day, so I'm excited for you guys to get that. And Lindsey Oskoui will be discussing the mechanics of a stormwater ordinance, and then I'm going to wrap this up with Port Lavaca. So let's go ahead and kick it off. I'm going to throw it to Justin, and thank you very much.
Yeah, between Jason and Nick, I tell you what, I'd hire myself. Good grief. Appreciate that warm welcome. I really wanted to start out this section. I just got finished this morning with doing a career day at an elementary school, and asked the classes, why would you go into engineering? And many of them had the same answer, and that was that they wanted to make a difference. And so I just thought it was appropriate today. The real goal of what we're trying to do is give you tools to make a difference, especially since municipalities generally have limited resources. And in that vein, the goal of going back through some of this history is really just to level set, help you make the case with some of your elected officials and the public at large, understand why is there a need to focus or improve on water quality, which can oftentimes be a bigger challenge than just finding resources. So if I could get the next slide there, I'll start this. So we won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's worth going back to the original Water Quality Act, the Rivers and Harbors Act, which, by the way, is still in effect. Many of you with navigable waters know that USAE still uses this to weigh in on improvements like port facilities. But it was also, or a portion of that act was also one of the first activities taken by the US government to curb the discharge of trash to navigable streams. It really wasn't very good at enforcement and left a lot to be desired. And so for a long time, for 50 years, the United States largely did not focus on improving its water quality regulations. On the heels of World War II, which I think is very interesting, you can see this in Texas specifically. Corpus Christi's port got converted from a military port, a resupply port, into an industrial center. Same with the energy port over in Houston. Both of those came about this same time, and that kind of played itself out across the United States. All of that money moving back into the United States and industrial development began highlighting water quality issues or discharges into streams. And so the Federal Water Pollution Control Act came to being in 1948, and predominantly its focus was on wastewater. Didn't have effluent limitations per se. Then the Cuyahoga River fire happened, which, by the way, I thought this was kind of interesting. The actual fire that made it on Time magazine was in the 50s, not the 1969 fire. It was just that in 1969, that's when Ohio decided to actually take action, and the city forefathers actually moved into rectifying some of the issues. I know you guys know this. I see a lot of practitioners on the call. Then, Rachel Carson publishes her book in the 70s, highlighting a need for improved focus on all types of environmental policy. And then we get the Clean Water Act of 1972. And if I could get the next slide, the Clean Water Act, which, by the way, for those of you looking, that's the Cuyahoga River to your right. Think that's an excellent opportunity for adaptive redevelopment and reestablishment of a wetland in that oxbow, but that's a different topic for a different day. The Clean Water Act gave us comprehensive water quality legislation that we're actually operating under now. It is the authority that has been passed down to the cities, and you will see a consistent theme that many of you I know are already dealing with, which is it's an unfunded mandate that's passed from the national level to the state level down to the local level. Section 303D, it should be very familiar. That is where we get our impaired streams requirements. And so Texas establishes criteria and determines which streams are polluted. Section 401 is really used for interagency coordination because, those types of permitting activities under the Act also is considered a federal action. And so that's authorization to coordinate with other entities. Section 402 is very common for those who understand wastewater discharges. It's also the authority for can everybody still hear me? I just saw a mic pop up.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. 402 is wastewater discharges, but it also establishes the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or TEPTA, as it flowed down to the state. And that is where many different forms of permitting get their authority. And then Section 404 is our ultimate favorite. Whenever we do things within the ordinary high water mark, we seek authorization from the Corps of Engineers to do that. The Act is where that authority comes from. Could I get the next slide? So the significant components of the Clean Water Act that have been amended since, in the 80s, we became aware of non-point source discharges, and we'll talk about that a little more here in a second. In the 90s, we then began to regulate non-point source discharges with the phase 1 rollout for cities that were greater than 100,000 in population. Many of the folks that we're talking to today are impacted by this next phase, which was phase 2 in the late 90s for cities that were less than 100,000 in population and within the urban area as defined by the census. And so if we look at this next slide, as crazy as it sounds, we've only had 4 permits under the phase 2 program in Texas, with the first being issued in 2007 and the most recent being issued in 2024. And so, not a terribly long history, truly, even though it's kind of felt that way. So if we go to the next slide. The Texas Pollution Discharge Elimination System was initially authorized in 1998. Again, as we were talking about before, this is where the federal government passes down its responsibility for water quality to the state for enforcement. And then ultimately the state passes that authority on to municipalities for enforcement through the MS4 programs. That is especially true of construction permits and non-point source discharges through the MS4 program. Next slide. So what is an MS4? I know many of you know. This is just a refresher. It is a separate storm sewer system. It is a way of collecting a multitude of non-point source discharges and then naming them as a regulated entity. That may seem common to those of us who are from the Southwest, but on the East Coast, there are still combined sewers where wastewater and sewer or storm drain are connected. In fact, we're working on one of those in Portland, Maine now. Those are regulated under the EPA CSO, or combined sewer program. MS4s are focused on non-point source, although there could be point sources that are regulated further by the MS4, and we'll talk about those in a minute. And generally that MS4 is comprised of outfalls, open channels, ditches, storm drains, all the things that were required to be mapped with that first permit in 2007. Next slide. So phase 2 MS4s are still in a tiered permitting approach, even with the most recent change. It's based on the census that the most recent census as of the permit renewal, and then whether you're in the urbanized area is defined by that census. And these are the various levels. Many of you probably already know which level you fall within. So we'll go to the next one. So generally speaking, we're still operating under the TXR 40,000 permit, and it was issued in August of 24. I hope many of you have already filed your notice of intent and put together your stormwater management plan. This is just a refresher. That stormwater management plan is your communication to TCEQ on how your MS4 will meet the permit requirements. There are now 6 minimum control measures. Many of you remember there were only 5, and now there are 6. The industrial permit kicks in for those cities that are greater than 100,000. And then there's additional optional requirements for construction authorized by the MS4 that one could undertake for automatic authorization. And TCEQ is working on its review of those. Hopefully that will go faster as they have removed some of the options for measurable goals. Next slide. So the additional requirements that apply to MS4 programs that I think are of note that are often overlooked is Part 3 of the permit that deals with impaired water bodies and total maximum daily loads. Many may think that just because you don't have a TMDL or approved TMDL that you don't have any additional discharge requirements, and that's just not true. Section B under Part 3 actually deals with those communities who do not have approved TMDLs and your MS4 discharges to those streams. If the impairment is for bacteria, there are some specific requirements that apply. But with any community and any type of impairment, the MS4 is then obligated then to determine whether it is a source or a significant source of the pollutant of concern, and if so identified, provide targeted BMPs on load reductions. That could be pretty significant in some cases. Next slide. So in general, that stormwater management plan, we kind of talked about it. It was due back in February for everybody, even though you may have just received your 2019 permit renewal and then turned around and filed a permit renewal for the next permit. Hopefully that'll go quicker. Again, it communicates that how and addresses those minimum control measures, and it provides measurable goals with specificity of how your community is going to provide those minimum requirements. And it's on a plus or minus 5-year renewal. As many of you know, 2007 took a while, and so did this most recent permit renewal, likely because of the COVID pandemic. But that renewal is pending now. Next slide. So what are those minimum control measures? Public education and outreach is one that's pretty easy to achieve. And then we've got public involvement and participation, your stream days, your coastal cleanup days. Those fall within those categories. The ones that are a little harder are the illicit discharge detection and elimination. For those that aren't entirely familiar, any discharge not completely composed of stormwater is illicit. That was difficult for me to understand for a little while as well. And some of the things that fall within those categories that are a little harder or require multiple agency coordination are sanitary sewer overflows and on-site sewage facilities. Many of you probably have an ILA with the county for permitting of OSSFs. But then whose responsibility is it after that to follow up and verify that the OSSFs are functioning as intended? That often is a gap. And ultimately, if there is a discharge, that is the responsibility of the MS4 for IDDE. And so industrial releases fall into this category. As you increase in level, the requirements for following up and enforcing industrial releases or permit requirements also levels up. Construction site stormwater runoff controls are low-hanging fruit for your citizenry to call TCEQ and say, I saw yellow tinged discharges from a construction site, and suddenly you're into producing documentation. So that again is where the enforcement comes directly to the city, oftentimes without funding. However, the city can levy fees in order to help fund that part of their program. Post-construction stormwater management is kind of, this is where your ordinances come into play, and Lindsey will talk about some creative ways that you can leverage those ordinances to address post-construction. This is particularly important where the MS4 has determined that it is a significant source of the load to a TMDL or non-TMDL impaired water body. And then level 4 only for industrial stormwaters, and then that often not used automatic authorization for construction activities by the MS4. Next slide. Okay, so we talked about how did we even get all the way down to the point that my community now has to be concerned about water quality. It didn't come with funding. How am I going to meet that need, particularly in communities that don't already that are already underfunded as it comes with as in its needs for stormwater management? So let's talk about some of those resources. You know, to the extent that you can, your participation in these type of activities like Clean Coast Texas, leveraging the resources that this body produces, same with AgriLife and their watershed protection plans. Those are sources of grant funding that provide resources for the community to automatically adopt, similar to the plans that we're going to be talking about today, and then begin improving their future developments, as well as providing criteria for future redevelopment. And that it helps reduce the cost and speed the implementation. Some other sources of funding could be your stormwater utility fee. It is an enterprise, and so you could help fund some of these activities. Oftentimes, there's not a lot of support for that to fund capital expenditures, at least not large ones. So once you get the criteria adopted, your capital projects then become fodder for you to advance your water quality program. Same with flood mitigation. We are actually working with the GLO now on alternatives analysis for the river basin flood studies. And that's a clear focus to help improve benefit cost ratios for some of these alternatives, is leveraging or including green infrastructure into that programming so that they become grant eligible. Your community partners are probably your biggest asset. The river authorities are advancing the goal of improving water quality. They're kind of the front line. You can rely on them for analytic sampling for something as simple as your IDDE program. Work with your river authority to determine whether they already have analytics and if they could help provide direction on determining sampling plans to determine whether your community is a significant source. You can turn to them to completely use them as a third party to manage your IDDE program potentially, or you can use pooled contracting. In the case of removal of sources, you may need a construction contract to do demolition or at least do some construction. To make that affordable for your community, you may pool those resources or those needs and contract with multiple municipalities. You do have a shared burden with existing residents and new residents in your community. And so to the extent that you can, at least stop digging the bottom of the hole by improving your development codes, and then improve as you begin to do retrofits by adopting policies and procedures that result in higher water quality. And honestly, it's at the bottom of the list, but probably should be at the top. Preservation is the low-hanging fruit. Take that high value riparian area and maintain it. Prevent it from being used, or incentivize its preservation by giving developers freedom in other areas of the community. Next slide. Okay, so we did talk about watershed protection plans. I did see AgriLife is on the call, and they can validate this. It is voluntary participation. Those tools are actually intended for you to identify things that your MS4 could undertake, whether that is part of the public outreach, if it's providing pet waste facilities. You really actively participate in those groups and identify things that will help you and your MS4 achieve your intended targets. Next slide. Okay, so the big tool that we wanted to talk about today that Lindsey's going to dive into a little more is this guidance for stormwater drainage on the Texas coast. One potential opportunity that Lindsey will dive into is that there's an awful lot of criteria that's already been written here that could be referred to. May not be perfect today. However, if you're doing, UDC revisions or you're going through your code reviews and you need a bolt-on guide to help your community advance its stormwater criteria, this is a great resource for you that's already been paid for. Again, may not get you all the way, but it'll get you a lot further down the road. And again, the goal is to make a difference. So Lindsey has some great corollaries from her time at Bee Caves, and I look forward to hearing this as well.
Thanks, Justin. That was great. Gave me a chance for my trigger finger to relax a little bit too. Thanks, everybody. So today, as Justin said, I'm going to be, if I can get the screen to go. Okay, I'm going to be speaking about the mechanics of a stormwater ordinance. And so Justin was really getting into kind of the entire array of your stormwater system. And my portion is going to focus specifically on regulating construction and post-development. So this is the ordinance that lets a city really make sure that the quality and quantity of stormwater runoff that's coming from sites is clean and managed as it flows from construction sites, as well as once the site is finished. For those of you that are familiar with local regulation, there are going to be some really common components of a stormwater ordinance similar to other development regulations. But you're going to need to consider, some of the standard stuff like your purpose, the reasons behind which you're adopting the ordinance, the authority bestowed upon you by the state regulations, as well as to whom this applies. Now, it's going to apply across, of course, across development, but there might be some exemptions, such as small lots or single-family residential or redevelopment of under a certain threshold. And so, one of the things that I'm going to go through next is some of the considerations and priorities that your community may have in adopting the stormwater ordinance. As Justin mentioned, there's model ordinances. But as you adopt perhaps a second version, you can really tailor it to your community's needs. And that will dictate your performance standards and your design criteria, the types of best management practices that are suitable for you based on the pollutants you want to remove. In most cases, total suspended solids are a priority, but you may also consider removal of oil and grease or phosphorus. But with that decision comes more limited best management practices. And so these are the types of conversations that you can have with your city engineer or the resources that we're highlighting today. Of course, the stormwater ordinance is going to need to set up the mechanics of how you go through plan review, the permitting process, as well as inspections and really, what you are doing during construction to make sure that things are being built to your standards. But after construction, after the certificate of occupancy or the site final has been issued, you're also going to need to make sure that those stormwater management practices are maintained. There are options that are more passive and some that require really checks multiple times a year. They may have mechanical components like pumps. And so you need to think about who is maintaining them, public versus private. I'll talk a little bit about that more later in the presentation, but really the city's job does not stop once permits are issued or once a site is final. And then of course you're also going to need to think through the resources that it takes for enforcement and what your city is comfortable with in terms of pursuit of penalties. As Justin mentioned, you certainly have available to you to fund both the program during construction, but also after construction fees and annual permit fees for your stormwater ordinances. So if you elect either to adopt a tailored ordinance or after adopting the model ordinance want to tailor it, I would encourage you to the conversations you have within your city to consider your primary motivations. Of course, there are the environmental components, water quality, making sure you have maintain a healthy natural habitat and recharge of groundwater. Those are all really common motivations for a city to adopt the stormwater ordinance. It could be more about flood control and property prevention, flood prevention and maintenance of property values. Oftentimes, depending on the types of best management practices you use, they can actually have really great aesthetic value. And so it can have the result of increasing property values somewhat indirectly. And then, of course, there's the obligatory component. You're required by the state to regulate, as Justin highlighted in his portion on MS4, you're required to manage stormwater both in the coming off private sites as well as in the public realm. And so, there's an aspect of needing to do this. You may also, I worked for a city in which there was an environmental group that sued the city. And so that, in order to settle that lawsuit, the city adopted increased water quality standards among the most stringent in the state. And so there could be a whole host of reasons. In most cases, it's a combination of all these things. But the reason I break them up is so you can parse out your priorities, because that will help you decide, really dialing in on what standards, quantifiable standards you wish to emphasize. So perhaps if water quality is one of your top priorities because you're trying to improve the health of some of your creeks and waterways, then you might be adopting a standard, a very quantifiable, achievable standard related to removal of total suspended solids. And TCEQ provides a lot of guidance on best management practices that meet that threshold. You may, as a companion, or be looking to adopt a 50-foot buffer zone along creeks and streams. In Bee Cave, where I used to work, we had a 95% pollutant removal standard and used a water quality buffer zone. In addition to those on-site best management practices, we used water quality buffer zones of different sizes to treat that last 5% of pollutants to achieve 100% non-degradation. If flood resilience is your one of your primary goals, then you might be looking to require the on-site detention over a certain size property, or commonly limit impervious cover. That can have some related benefits for other aspects of your code, like landscaping requirements or open space requirements. And you can also prioritize things like green infrastructure, which help disaggregate your impervious cover, and just by simply separating it, help achieve infiltration, better infiltration rates. And like I mentioned, maybe you're motivated just by compliance with regulations. And so adopting these construction, erosion, and sedimentation control standards will help you satisfy your MS4 permit. So that was, kind of an overview of the mechanics of what you might consider in this program. And I wanted to just share, as I wrap up, a few lessons that I learned, or that we learned while I was at Bee Cave, that were, to me at least, counterintuitive when I began my position back in 2012 as the director of planning and development. The arena of stormwater management was new to me. And one of those things was and so we went through a code update, adopted a UDC, a Unified Development Code, in 2018-19. We started to update it. And one of the areas that we evaluated were our stormwater treatment standards. I mentioned that the city adopted standards back in the mid-2000s of 95% pollutant removal, and that was for total suspended solids, oil and grease, and phosphorus. TSS and oil and grease are pretty common pollutants to remove, but phosphorus isn't. It's trickier, it's harder to remove. You really have to have a vegetative element. And so there's really the one best management practice that is available to remove that much phosphorus is called retention re-irrigation. It's very space intensive. but on top of that, it has a pump component. And what we found over the intervening 10, 15 years that 95% pollutant removal standard was in effect was that those pumps were routinely failing, and the city was in a position, so they were privately maintained or theoretically maintained per code, owned and operated ponds, but by the second and third owner of those properties, people didn't know what a stormwater pond was. They didn't know they had a pump. So when we would go out for annual inspections, they were often broken because the silt would get in and clog them and break them pretty much, maybe not every rainstorm, but frequently. And so we made a strategic decision to actually reduce our pollutant removal standard to 90% in order to get better compliance, because by reducing it that 5%, you introduced a whole lot more best management practices that when done in series or in what's called a treatment train, you could actually prove out 95% pollutant removal, and they didn't have a pump component. So the maintenance, the ongoing maintenance was of a different intensity. So again, a little counterintuitive, maybe if you to hear that 90% treatment maybe is more effective than 95%, but just a subtle thing to consider. Another thing I would like to highlight is public versus private. The city, when they adopted that stormwater ordinance, really didn't have a professional staff, very small population. And so they opted to keep that stormwater infrastructure privately owned. And that may be an appropriate solution. It remains an appropriate solution, but I would like to highlight that we did end up the approach to, we spent a lot of time in the annual permitting process, re-permitting process, on having to try to educate people that even had a pond, and the enforcement. There's a lot of letter writing that had to happen, and you really had to work closely with your city attorney. And you know, if you were going to get compliance, it took a lot of administrative effort. And so that may be a reason to consider integrating these into a public part of the public system and have a stormwater management district. So all of these things I bring up as food for thought as you're considering how you want to structure it for your city, and avail yourself of these resources that you've heard about today. As Justin mentioned, there is a fantastic model ordinance that was developed by this collection of agencies and nonprofits, and we are companies like Doucet are also available to help both in the structure of the program as well as ongoing assistance with plan review and things of that nature. So I encourage you to dive into some of these resources that you have available, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Nick now, who's going to highlight a community, Port Lavaca, that did just that. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm going to try to wrap this up pretty quick so we have some time for questions. Ashley, I want to discuss our engagement as part of the Clean Coast Texas team with the City of Port Lavaca. If you can go to the next slide, Lindsay. This again, I want to highlight the value of the partnership there, and kind of how this ordinance process went about. I think in looking back on this process and so many other efforts that I've been a part of, it's really key when you're identifying those community needs, that you're finding the right fit solutions for these communities, for your community. Is an ordinance the right tool, or are there other updates that can be made? And the other big part of that is having local champions. In Port Lavaca, I don't know if they're on today, but Jody Weaver, the city manager, Wayne Schaefer, Public Works Director, RJ Shelley there as well. We're great local champions for this process to team up and ensure that, you know, the community is getting the message, the elected officials are getting the message, that communication is going back and forth between your engineering team, your Clean Coast Texas team, your city leaders, and and that's so critical to see these things progress and develop and actually get implemented. So there's a lot of outreach involved in this process. In Port Lavaca specifically, we targeted some outreach and got a lot of stakeholder input. We had listening sessions and drafting sessions. We've had to adapt due to new questions that get brought up along the way as new folks become involved in the process. That results in more drafting, which is where we are right now. And all the entire time, what we're looking for, and Justin mentioned this at the beginning, so many of these are unfunded mandates. So how do we get the funds and resources into these communities to be able to update their codes, update their drainage manuals, update their ordinances? And we want to do that in the most efficient way possible. Lindsey, if I could get the next slide. One of the best ways to keep your costs down is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are so many resources out there. The Sustainable Stormwater Manual, guidance for sustainable stormwater drainage on the Texas coast, but I like to say the Sustainable Stormwater Manual has a great basis for design for many of these projects, and especially that model ordinance was what we used in Port Lavaca as a go-by to help the community get through this process, to help Jody and Wayne kind of bring their thoughts together on what's worked and what they need, what their needs are. And as a result, what we're looking at is a partial adoption of that stormwater ordinance, or of the Sustainable Stormwater Manual. So the ordinance calls back to the Sustainable Stormwater Manual for guidance on various BMPs and construction standards, engineering design standards, etc. So we were looking at that with the city. The next slide, please. We had meetings, like I said, as we went through the ordinance development process. We wanted to look at focus areas. What are the key drivers for this ordinance? What areas of the city were really needing to be targeted, areas poised for future growth. The city of Port Lavaca wanted to be MS4 ready when that time comes. So needing to start moving toward that effort. We needed some design standards. So designing for a 1.5-inch storm, for instance, and looking at that both from a water quality standard and how that might address flooding as well. So those two are so linked, and the ability to try to address both of those is really important for the city and for the water quality goals that we had. The city itself has a drainage manual from 1989. So we wanted to be able to update that without having to, again, completely update everything that was, you don't need to necessarily update everything. So we could use the Sustainable Stormwater Manual in specific portions of this ordinance to enhance or address certain components. And let's go to the next slide so we can get this wrapped up and have some questions. I wanted to, I think that this process was really enhanced by some fantastic outreach done by the Texas A&M AgriLife Community Watershed Partners team, charm workshops, gift workshops, fast workshops. You can see on the top right there, these are some of there were models that were created for certain areas to show how they may or may not be impacted by the effects of the ordinance. So we were trying to not only educate the community and help them plan for future development, but also you could see real time as we would make adjustments, how the ordinance being implemented might affect new developments. And I thought that was some really compelling visuals. It led to some great conversations, and those conversations are ongoing. Another key thing, we gave a workshop to the city council, and a request was made by the council that they wanted to hear from, somebody who'd actually, updated a stormwater ordinance or added a stormwater ordinance. So luckily we had the city engineer from the city of Bernie who had just, gone through the process, the stormwater ordinance process a few years prior, and met with some of the city staff and elected officials there to talk about some of the costs and benefits of their ordinance and how that might be applied to Port Lavaca. So a great, robust conversation, great resources around this state, and it just Clean Coast Texas provides that awesome network, and it's just been fun to work with. I've got 3 more slides, but we're going to do those real quick. I just wanted to kind of hit some of the high points of the stormwater ordinance in Port Lavaca as it stands. Again, it's this combination of water quality and managing flooding and stormwater to be more resilient, to help build a more resilient community now and in the future. As infrastructure is outdated, that new infrastructure can be built smarter and can be built more sustainably when there's thoughtful planning in place and good regulatory guidance through this ordinance. There were areas that are, certain types of development that are exempt, ag uses, minor residential, disaster recovery, those kind of things. You don't really want to hamper certain types of development or certain types of activities. And we really want to balance that with a healthy economy in a community as well as that healthy environment. So next slide. So some of the key pieces in there that Port Lavaca has decided to really evaluate as a final components of this ordinance. We've got buffer zones on those waterways, wetlands and tidal areas, getting the right stormwater detention and focusing on those goals of 80% removal of TSS. We want to encourage low impact development and promote some of these BMPs that can be found in the Sustainable Stormwater Manual in new development. Next slide. All right, so again, none of these great ideas can work unless you have a operations, administration, and maintenance and enforcement plan that's workable by your city staff. So one of the most effective tools are some of these pre-development meetings and making sure that developers understand what's expected. It helps them because they can plan their projects better and build that relationship with the community. We try to throw in an incentive to what we're considering is providing some Clean Coast Texas stormwater management modules that were developed and are available online on the Clean Coast Texas site. If those are completed, potentially that could reduce some of the development fees and also create a more educated network of developers and construction folks and all the folks that are building our communities. So we wanted to try to incentivize that education through this process. The maintenance of those BMPs, we've looked at prescriptions for Port Lavaca that's going to work for them, whether those are public or private, and what kind of enforcement Port Lavaca was willing to put in. Every city again is going to be different, but I'll just close by saying again, while each community is different, I think we can agree with we don't want to be putting coastal communities at a disadvantage to their neighbors. So regional collaboration with your river authorities, collaboration with your county and neighboring cities, and things like that to have a plan to where we're creating, a Texas coastal zone for the future that we can be proud of and that will be more resilient and strong. So with that, I think that's the last slide I had. I really appreciate it. We might have a couple minutes for questions. Sorry we went long. We're pretty excited about these topics. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jason and Ashley. Thanks a lot.
No worries, Nick. Lindsey and Justin, thank you so much for wonderful presentations. You covered a ton of territory, even taking us back into the late 60s and 70s. So we appreciate all of that. And just to remind folks who are listening right now, please place your chats or comments or items of interest into the chat function, and we will address those shortly. I see we have a couple teed up. If we go a couple minutes late, I think we'll be fine with that if there's interest here. But I wanted to kind of kick us off and get us started. And of course, Lindsey or Justin, you're welcome to join us on screen if you're interested. But so my kind of kickoff question here is, sometimes in the background of the ordinance work, we have overlying, maybe it's a source water protection regulation, or maybe it's groundwater regulation that requires some enhanced stormwater protection. When those are not present, do you have a couple of key points that might be useful to focus in on as folks are engaging city infrastructure, city staff, with perhaps opening up the books for ordinance development? Because sometimes we've found hesitancy in the desire to address enhanced ordinance for stormwater, and I just wonder if you had any best practices or tips or tactics that might be helpful.
Lindsey, you want to go?
Yeah, sorry, I was having some audio issues, so I didn't catch some of the first part of the question.
That's all right. I'll cover this one, I think. And Jason, you and I have worked together on this. I think that I'd love to hear if Justin or Lindsey have any ideas for incentivizing some of this. But I really think it has been, at least historically for me in projects, listening to the community and trying to find and parse out those key moments and those key people when you hear something that and you can put an opportunity like a funding opportunity together with a need. And I think I stopped my presentation one too quick, because in this process with Port Lavaca, we also were engaging with them to get a Resilient Communities Program grant, which they just, I guess, completed and are now in the process of procuring grant management services for that. But those are great opportunities for cities right now to go after some of these available funds from the GLO through the Resilient Communities Program to update their codes, update their ordinances, and get that more enhanced water quality approach codified within their community. And so I think providing those funding opportunities is critical, man, because if you don't have to do it, why should you spend money? So finding funding opportunities is a really key piece to that.
Thank you, Nick, for addressing a tough question I sent over your way to get us going. You did a great job.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
Jason, could I add to that?
Yes.
I think
Sure.
Nick brought up a great resource. However, I keyed in on one thing that you said that really I feel like is a commonality in most of Texas, particularly outside of Austin. Austin has a lot of interested activism where other parts of Texas really don't. And so it has to come down to a legislative requirement. There has to be a law or regulatory force in order for communities to take on water quality. And what I keyed in on what you said was, how do I get city governance to pay attention to or give notice or even any importance to the need for water quality if they're not reminded of the regulatory requirement? I would say that this presentation actually probably canonizes exactly why water quality is a requirement. And I would offer, as Nick suggested, I think education is our friend, and educating elected officials or newly elected officials on what is the regulatory requirement and what are the different mechanisms that we can use in order to comply at the lowest cost? Because that generally is where the rubber meets the road is, are you asking me for money? And beyond having the regulatory requirement, I think being able to point to these are the levers that we can pull. The lowest level is enacting ordinances on future development. The next highest level is enacting ordinances that impact your own capital projects or capital spending. And then the next level beyond that is actual spending of capital dollars in order to build water quality improvements.
Thank you so much for that. We appreciate that additional information, Justin. Ashley, I'd like to turn it over to you to see if we have some additional questions or comments to address.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, we are going over, but if you have an opportunity to stay on, please do. If you can't, we are recording, so you can watch the Q&A after, since this is over lunchtime, but we appreciate everyone joining. I have a question. Someone who does stormwater inspections on the industry side, what is the best way to determine ownership of the MS4 in a given area?
I'm gonna say Justin should answer that question.
Yeah. So there are regulated entity maps published by TCEQ, and that would be where I go. I guess if you're doing inspections, my question back to you would be: is this an area where you have been given authority or been asked to do an inspection, and you're confused about which MS4 has the authority to enforce, or is this just a general question of I might be interested in doing inspections and I want to know which MS4 I would contact?
That's a question you're posing, or?
That it was, yeah, sorry.
Yes, okay. Yeah,
No dramatic
yeah. We'll see if he's still on and he might pop into that. I also wanted to ask something that I've been getting questions about and we're trying to start exploring is regional code adoption. So across different municipalities. Do you at Doucet have any experience or insight into that process as communities start to think about working with each other to adopt some type of, cross-regional ordinance for stormwater management, water quality? Do you have any insights or thoughts into how they can go about approaching that, or maybe things they need to think about as they're approaching that? That makes sense?
I have one, I guess, great example. Jenna can probably speak to this even better. But in Western Hays County, for instance, there was a great effort between the cities of Wimberley, Wood Creek, and Hays County to each adopt resolutions promoting one water. And in that, there were certain commitments that each community made and in the county as well to promote that in future development and their own capital projects, etc. But those types of resolutions like that, they are great political tools for coordination and collaboration, I would say.
But I do just want to emphasize that while the resolution is a great way to express a position that, for future policy, you really do, each individual jurisdiction is actually going to need to adopt the regulation. That's what actually creates the rules. So make sure you take that second step too.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to share an example of those MOUs and resolutions if anyone's interested. And so you can contact me through the Meadows Center for that. And we are also working to further those resources with some model RFP language and, more of a guide within the construction process.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenna. Yeah, so that's helpful. So you can certainly reach out to me or Jenna to kind of learn more about that. And I can connect you with her. I'm gonna, if you see Justin, the gentleman kind of put a little more explanation in, but so I can, if you see that, I can let you take the answer if you want.
I apologize. I just took a bite of a chip right as you said that.
Perfect.
So I do inspections. It's part of the plan requirements to notify the MS4. Just want to make sure the proper notifications are the maps you mentioned on TC. Yes, all I found on there is a redirect to the US Census map that shows metropolitan areas. Yeah, Andrew, I can get with you afterwards to help direct you to the resource that you'll need. It's the same regulated entity database that you would pull industrial permittees and such through in order to make sure that the MS4 is aware of permittees that are within their jurisdiction.
Do you guys have a slide with your contact information on, or is that something
Nick?
you guys provided or no? We can follow up maybe in an email. If you guys are all right with sharing that, we can follow up so people can reach out.
Absolutely.
But we can start to wrap up. I don't see any other questions, but I do want to let people know if they are an elected official or a city staff member, or even in a nonprofit, and you want to have these conversations in your community and you need a little help with education or getting some motivation, because I know there's a lot of hesitance, and certainly with the developers and stuff. Clean Coast Texas can help and provide that service and help and kind of work with you to come up with messaging or to present in front of city council. We're happy to do that if we want to start exploring some of these options in our coastal communities. And with that, I'm gonna end this right here, and I really appreciate everyone for joining us. Thank you, Nick, Lindsey, and Justin. That was super informative, and I look forward to sharing this with everyone and having them be able to watch this again. So thank you all.
And I'd just like to add briefly, if I could, just thanks to Doucet-Kleinfelder for all your work and contributions on the Clean Coast Texas team and helping us to push the ball forward. And we look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.